to Moscow, Russia during the World Cup. Now, some of you out here don't know what's the World Cup. Okay, the biggest sporting event in the world was in Moscow, Russia. It's called the World Cup. They play soccer. Okay, so yes, or football, as they say in the rest of the world. And Exodus Cry is a group. They're in Kansas City. They're good friends with Casey IHOP that we love there. And their mission is to help stop sex trafficking, to work in and infiltrate the commercial sex industry and see women rescued, women and men rescued out of that horrible thing. So these guys went with Exodus Cry to Moscow when thousands of people descend on that city, and many pimps, for lack of a better word, have brought women illegally, trafficked women there for the crowd that's gathering. So is that a fair summary? So these brave two went over there and were like, well, maybe we'll just jump right in the middle of that and see if we can help. So who wants to start here? Tell us a little about that. What do you want to add to that overview?
Okay, so along with our outreach, something that we did that we felt was super important was laying a foundation in prayer and intercession while we were there. So there's an IHOP in Moscow, not 24/7 like the ones that we have here, but while we were in Russia, we were making it 24/7. So our team was in there for hours and hours. 6-hour sets. So we all took turns. I was in there from 6 a.m. to noon every day. Nathan had a night watch. So we just really think that everything that happened that was for the kingdom and really successful was because of the foundation of prayer we had.
Let me just jump into that. I think that's so significant. This whole thing they did is so scary at one level. Like you watch TV at night and you can't help but all of a sudden, wham, they flash to a scene of being in a strip club, and so okay, turn away. No, these guys went in there, walked right back to the dressing room and began to talk to the gals, show them kindness, see if they could open up a conversation to talk about Jesus or how you doing. And I think that is unbelievable, and it's also some scary. And there's temptation. And so what was at the foundation? 6 hours a day in the presence of God before we go out on the street. And I think that is so wise. I think that's awesome. So Nathan, give us a highlight.
Yeah, so we did all kinds of different outreaches. I think one of the ones we only did one time is we did a John outreach or a sex buyer outreach. And so usually most of our trip was focused on the women who were in prostitution or had been trafficked, but we decided as a team that we wanted to go for one sex buyer. And so we had set up ads, fake ads on the internet, just like the normal ads. We had set up our own fake ads.
You guys were fake news?
Fake news. Yeah. So our team had set up a website with pictures of women. They were actually our friends, but just set up as models that guys got on and responded to, and all we had to do was respond back and set up a meeting. And so we had lots of responses, people from all over the world. So we decided, you know what, let's go for a John outreach is what they call it. So the way it worked was we responded to a guy and we knew his name was Brian and we knew he was from Los Angeles, but that was the only thing that we knew about him. We didn't know how old he was. We didn't know if he just is a normal thing that he does is buy sex, anything like that. But we set up a meeting he thought that he was meeting up with a woman named Anya at a hotel kind of bar area in the lobby, and they would go up to their hotel room and he would have an hour with Anya to do whatever he would like. So what he didn't know is he was going to meet me and one of my friends named Aaron. And so this was one of the most unique outreaches that we did, and the only one that we had never had any previous experience or training for, but we felt like with the Holy Spirit's help that we could do it. And so before we went out, I had one of my friends named Kelsey on the trip. I said, Kelsey, why don't you see if you can pray for this guy? His name's Brian. See if the Lord gives you any insight on this guy, some supernatural insight that we could use. So sure enough, she prays for him, gets a whole download of information about him that we should never know, but we know things about his childhood and all this stuff. I was like, okay, we're going to try and use this.
Wow.
So we go to the hotel. First of all, there was so much warfare on trying to set this up. Our phones were bugging out like crazy. We had to switch SIM cards in and out. The enemy did not want this meetup to happen.
Wow.
So we know that this guy's name is Brian. We get a text message. We're communicating with him. He thinks he's communicating with a woman. You get a text message that he's at the hotel. Okay, we're like, wow, okay, he's here. Well, here's what we'll do. We don't know what he looks like. We'll call him. We'll just have our phone on the table. We'll call him and see who picks up. And so we'll know who he is. So we do it. And we see a guy probably 20 feet ahead of us, sitting in a chair, watching the TV in the lobby. He picks up. And we're like, oh my gosh, there he is. And we see he's 24 years old. And he's a young guy. That's what we wanted. One of the things that we prayed for, God, let it be someone younger, because me and my friend Aaron, we're in our 20s. We just figured it would be a different dynamic if he was in his 50s. I don't know, it would just be, we felt like it would be different. We were hoping for a young guy. We're like, okay. So it was like, how are we gonna do this? We kind of had strategized, but a lot of the stuff had gotten thrown out the window. And when you're in the moment, we just decided we're just gonna have to go for it and trust the Holy Spirit will help us. So I told Aaron, I said, I'll go in first and approach him just as if as if I had gotten, the Lord had spoken to me about him, and like I would evangelizing to somebody. So I go up to him, and I said, hey, do you speak English? And he's like, yeah. It's like, oh, cool. My friend and I were praying over there, and we felt like the Lord spoke to me about you. Is that okay if I just share what the Lord, I feel like God is saying? He's like, yeah, sure, man, cool. I was like, okay. And so I started talking to him and sharing, I feel like the Lord was saying this and that about you and your dad and you and your brother and this and that. Does any of that resonate with you? And he's like, yeah, actually it does. I was like, oh, thank goodness. But so I had my foot in the door with that. So I just kind of bent down. He's sitting in a chair. I got down on one knee and started talking to him. I invited my friend, Aaron, come on over here, man. Meet my friend Brian. So we began to talk 5 or 6 minutes. Just kind of small talk. Well, about 5 or 6 minutes in, my friend Aaron, it kind of was a lull in the conversation. And Aaron just goes, listen, Brian, you're not going to have sex with Anya tonight. And he was just kind of froze for a minute. And we said, Brian, we actually set the whole thing up. We know why you're here. But we want to talk to you just as men. We don't want to come against you with judgment, but we want to come to you with love, and we just want to talk with you. Wow. Well, Kevin, it was the most amazing conversation maybe that I've ever had in my life. We had no idea how he would react, but the conversation lasted an hour and a half. We began to share our stories about how the Lord had saved us from sex addiction, and we began to hear about him, and he began to tell us things about his life. See, we all kind of have this picture of the person that we think would buy sex, and I'll be honest, they look just like you and me. So this guy's name is Brian. He's from Los Angeles. He is a dog trainer. He trains dogs, and he's really good at it. And he grew up in the church. You come to find out he grew up in the church, and he had just kind of walked away from the Lord in the past 2 years. And he's in Moscow for the games, just for the month, and he was lonely. He was all by himself. And he begins to tell us, he goes, I've seen the power of God through miracles. I said, really? What? Tell us about that. Well, I had a cavity in my tooth, and someone prayed for me, and it got instantly filled when they prayed for me. I was like, wow. Well, then, as he was telling me this, my friend Aaron was kind of praying in tongues underneath his breath. And he goes, oh, I know about the tongues. Okay. He goes, you're not going to believe this, but I've given sermons before. So you're not, and he's like, man, I live with a couple of guys in California, and they have a Bible study every Tuesday that in my apartment, sometimes I'll sit in on. And he begins to tell us these things, and we could both recognize that the Lord was breaking into this guy's life. And we come to find out, Kevin, that we said, is this something that you've done before? Is it your first time buying a woman for sex? And he said, I tried to buy a woman before, and I got scared, and I chickened out. But I was going to go through with it tonight. This is my first time. And that was a huge answer to our prayers too. We wanted somebody who was just at the beginning of this, like that the Lord would stop him before he moves into this whole other realm. And we began to just speak love and identity over this guy. And we talked for an hour and a half, about an hour into it. Aaron and I were going to wrap things up. And he asked, do you guys have to go? Like, can we stay and talk longer? Long story short, there's so many cool details, but we ended up getting his number. I went and hung out with him again the next day for 8 hours. I met with him outside of at this thing called Fan Fest, outside of the World Cup Stadium, and we watched the game. You can watch with lots of fans outside of these big screens. We watched the game, and then he came and had dinner with us and our team, and I loved on him, and we built a relationship, and we talked, and we hung for 8 hours. And I remember the last moments that I was with him. We were riding on the metro, and I knew his stop was before mine. And I knew I had about 1 minute left with him. And so my heart was so big for this guy. It was a supernatural thing with the Lord had just given me a heart for him. I said, Brian, I'm just so excited and proud of you, man. And I can't wait to just see what the Lord what he's going to take you to. And I said, it's been such an honor to be a part of that story and a part of your story. And I said, I don't think either one of us are going to forget last night. And he just looked at me with tears in his eyes. And he said, yeah, and today was so much better. And I was just doing everything I could to keep it together on the metro. And I just hugged him. I told him I loved him. And he left.
That is so powerful.
So that was definitely the most significant thing for me personally, and one of my favorite things that happened in the trip.
Praise God. Praise God. All right, Kayla, tell us something that you want to share.
Okay, I'll try and be a little bit shorter than that.
He's a good storyteller.
Okay, so one of the highlights for me was one of my very last outreaches there. So I was only in Russia for 3 weeks. Nathan got to be there for the whole time. So a lot of the first few weeks was just laying the groundwork, planting seeds, just a lot of prayer and setting things up for the last week or so, which is when we saw all this fruit, or I heard about all the fruit because I wasn't there at that time. But so one of my last nights, I was doing strip club outreach, and when we do that, we bring gifts for the girls. We go up to the bouncers at these clubs, just tell them what we're doing, and sometimes we get rejected, and sometimes they're really excited for us to be there. So this particular night, we had been rejected twice, which one of them was a place we had been accepted before, and they're like, come back, we love this, bring more gifts, but it was a different bouncer, and they wouldn't even let us speak to the manager or anything, so it was super discouraging, especially because this was my first time doing strip club outreach, and it would have been my only chance to do that. So I was just really discouraged, and something that I've learned a lot from this trip was really just like having faith in God's plan and not relying on, what I think it should look like or what our plan is, because God always has a much better plan than I can even think of. So 2 different clubs we went to, nothing, no success, and we were getting ready to just go home. We had been waiting for like 30, 45 minutes trying to figure out where we're gonna go. And then finally we decided, okay, we're gonna try this one more time. Someone from our team had gone there a couple days ago, and there were only 2 girls there. So we're like, okay, maybe there'll be more people here, so let's just try that. So we go to this club, they let us in almost immediately, and we go straight back to the dressing room, which is like the best area for us to actually get one-on-one time with these girls. So we walk into the dressing room, there's about 5 girls getting ready for the night. and we just strike up some conversation, hand out the gifts. The girls are just so happy to see us there. Just the thought that someone would care enough about them and value them enough to give them these gifts and not think that they're dirty people for doing what they do. Like, just, they feel so much value just from us giving them a gift. So that in itself was awesome to see these women just light up from such a small gift. But I was able to strike up a conversation with this girl named Favor. We found out was her real name, but at the time she told me her name was Tina. And I found out she was from Nigeria, and we just kind of had a brief conversation. She found out we were from America, and she's like, "Oh, we love Americans," and she gave me a big hug. And then once I handed her the gift, she asked if we were Christian, like what we're doing there, and then I find out that she is a Christian and loves the Lord, but has just felt, far away from Him. She knows that she's not, like, what she's doing, being in a strip club, is not from the Lord, and she hates what she does, and but she felt stuck, and she just kept telling me about how she would love to get out of it and do, like, ministry work and move somewhere and do work for the kingdom. And so, long story short, in the conversation, we exchanged numbers. I invited her to come to our church service at IHOP a few days later. Unfortunately, when I called her that day, like on this church service, she wasn't able to come, and I had to leave the next day. So I was super bummed that I had this great connection with this woman, but I wasn't going to get to talk to her again. And she really, really, that night was wanting to hang out again, even just get coffee and just talk to me. But after I left, one of the other girls from our team called her and kept being very persistent, and she ended up coming to several different things. She quit her job at the strip club. It's so awesome. She became really good friends with a few of the Russians there that are involved with IHOP, and those friendships are still building, and that's been so cool. And we also found out that she was actually trafficked from Nigeria into prostitution, and which is a huge thing, super common in Moscow. Women are trafficked from Moscow. They're told that they're going to study or get work in Moscow, then their passports are taken, and they're told that you have to pay off this $50,000 debt until we will free you. So she was stuck in prostitution for years, and then she was here illegally, had nowhere to turn to, no support or anything, so that's how she ended up in the strip club. So yeah, now she is done with that. She has another job. She's involved with IHOP in Moscow, and it's just been so awesome.
That is amazing. Isn't that fantastic? Wow. Well, we could listen to these guys share all day, amen. But we do have a preacher today. So tell me, Kayla, where you're going to be this year, what you're doing.
Okay, so in a few weeks, I'll be moving back to Warrensburg to finish my senior year at University of Central Missouri.
Nathan?
Yeah, so I'll be back in Kansas City to do my sophomore year. I go to the International House of Prayer University.
Awesome. So last thing, now, if you're a visitor here, I don't even know if I said these two are cousins, but their fathers are actually identical twins. But they were Christian guys. I bet they never did anything where they misused their identical twin thing and took tests for one another or anything like that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because they're actually not identical, even though they look identical.
Really?
Not technically. But so they look very much alike. They're twins, and they both married brunettes. And so a lot of our cousins, we have two distinct looks, but we look a lot like, our families look a lot alike. Kayla and I both represent the two kind of Griffith looks. But maybe if you know Shekinah or Josiah's pretty much how I looked when I was a kid. But it's funny, so as we look alike, sometimes even maybe the spouses would for a second get mixed up if you're looking from behind. And there's been a time or two where, maybe Kelly comes up and gives a little tap on my dad, thinking that it was his...
my God. Okay, TMI.
Well, no specific. Yeah, but it's a lot of fun. We're really...
That's awesome.
It's been so fun. Yeah, it's great.
All right, give a round of applause for these guys.